This video focuses on functions. Specifically, we're going to focus on how to determine if a table is a function. Recall the definition of a function. A function is any relationship between two variables where each of the input values, or x values, is assigned exactly one output value, or one y value. We know that if any of the input values or any of the x values produce more than one output, then at that point the relationship cannot be a function. Tables are one method that we have to display data about the relationship between two variables. If given a table and asked to determine whether it's a function, we use the repeating input test. We look to see if any of the x values repeat in the table, and that can help us determine if it's a function. If the relationship is a function, none of the x values will repeat. That's because each of the inputs or x values gets only one output, so we only need to list each of the x values once. If the relationship is not a function, we will see some of the x values repeating. If the same x value appears twice in the table, we know it must have two different outputs, and that's the reason the relationship is not a function. Let's look at some examples. This question here asks us to determine which relationships or which sets of coordinate points represent a function. They give 5 different relationships shown as tables. For relationship A, we see that none of the x values repeat. They only appear once each. So even though each x value is always equaling a y value of -2, relationship A is still a function, and that's because each of the inputs gets exactly one output. If we look to relationship B, we see that the x value, or the input of 2, appears twice in the table, so when x is 2, we don't know if the y value will be 7 or 5. Because of that, relationship B is not a function. The x value of 2 has multiple outputs. When we look to relationship C, we see that both the x value of -5 and the x value of -3 appear twice. So if x were -3, we don't know if y is going to be 2 or -3. Because of that, relationship C is not a function. Similarly, relationship D will not be a function because all 4 input values have the same value. It's 6, 6, 6, and 6. That shows us 4 different outputs that could possibly show up if the input's 6. Because of that, relationship D is not a function. For our final table, relationship E, we see 4 different x values. Each x value appears only once. That tells us each x value only has one output with it. Because of that, relationship E is the second one that is a function. So we would be marking E correct, we would be marking A correct, and B, C, and D are all incorrect answers because they are not functions.